Hey, are you guys looking for the easiest to install and the best sounding audio solution for your 14 to 18 RZR? Well, stay tuned because we're about to show it to you. Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to walk you through installing our THUNDER3 on this 2017 XP1000 behind me. Now it may look like a lot of parts, but it's real simple, shouldn't take you long to put it in. You've got your front speakers and their mounting brackets, your two amplifiers, 4-channel, and a mono block, your head unit, your mounting kit for the head unit, and all the wire harnesses, plus your high-powered subwoofer and your amp rack. Before we can get started though, we got to do a little disassembly on the vehicle, so the first thing we're going to want to do is remove the hood. Start by turning the two clasps and sliding the hood toward you. Next, remove the two T40 Torx bolts on either side of the hood opening. Then lift up on the dash panel and slide it toward the passenger compartment. Once loose, disconnect your switches and gauge cluster and remove it from the vehicle. Now we'll remove the T40 Torx holding the dash pocket in place, and then remove the pocket from the vehicle. The next step we're going to have to do is remove the bottom portion of our dash. In order to do that, we're going to need to first remove the T-handle, the two T40 screws at the top of the dashboard, unclip the right and left hand side, pulling the dash towards you. Remove it from the vehicle. Now that we have the whole front end of the vehicle cleared, let's go ahead and remove the seats. Now that the seats are removed, we have easy access to the center console. We're going to remove the 5 plastic clips, 3 in the front section of the center console, two in the rear. You're also going to remove 2 T40 bolts and pull this straight up, feeding the seat belt and the shifter gasket back down through. All right, now that we've got the vehicle pretty much disassembled, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our new subwoofer enclosure we're about to install. So this is new to all of our new Thunder kits that come with the subwoofer. Some of its really cool features are simply this cap. This cap is really cool. This is either going to be your choice, a sealed enclosure, which you would do by leaving the cap on, or ported by taking it off. But if you keep this cap in your vehicle, if you think you're going to submerge it or get the water up high enough where this thing could possibly fill, all you have to do is reach down and simply put that back on. A couple of the other cool features are, for example, this little bar right here. This will allow you to slide the enclosure up into the vehicle and then simply slide the bar over, which will hold the enclosure in place while you go ahead and find some of your other hardware or answer the phone. Now on the back of this, you'll see we've applied a super thick neoprene-based gasket so that when this thing compresses inside the vehicle, it'll stop as many rattles as we possibly can. So let's go ahead, get the glove box out, and get this in its place. To remove the existing glove box, you're simply going to remove the two 10mm bolts in the top center, just below the T-handle bracket. Once the bolts are removed, simply pull it towards you. We need to remove one bolt from the firewall. It's located directly above the passenger side left footrest. When prepping the subwoofer enclosure for installation, use the larger of the two brackets supplied. Insert the bracket into the recess on the top of the subwoofer enclosure. Using a 10mm bolt, insert it into the slot on the subwoofer side of the enclosure. hand tighten, allowing the bracket to still slide. To install the subwoofer box, insert the enclosure underneath the T-handle grab bar, push firmly upward and against the back wall. Slide the bracket over, insert a second 10mm bolt in the center slot of the bracket. Install the 4 remaining 10mm bolts into the inserts in the enclosure. Only hand tighten at this point. Install the second bracket using 2 10mm bolts, only hand tighten at this point. You're going to insert the lower screw into the hole where you removed the initial T40 from over the left footrest on the passenger side. Tighten it all the way down. Return to the top of the enclosure and tighten all your hardware. All right, now it's time to go ahead and install our kick panels into this vehicle. This is really simple to do. Using our new podlock bracket, we're going to use existing Polaris hardware to hold the bracket in, and then one simple bolt will hold the kick panels in. Some cool features about these is this is how you're going to get them. They're going to be sealed. You never have to remove your speaker like some of our competitors do. It's a simple plug and play. It's got vibration dampening material on it. It's ready to go and it's super simple. First thing we got to do is get this bracket into the car. So let's go ahead and do that. To start the installation, we're going to remove 2 T40 Torx bolts and 1 13mm body bolt. Now that we've got the bolts removed, we're going to align our bracket with the holes that the bolts came out of and return all the hardware we just took out, locking the bracket into the vehicle. On the bottom of the speaker pod, you'll notice 2 slots that line up with the slots on the bracket. You're going to set that in place and lean it back towards the vehicle, putting your top bolt in to secure it. Once your pods are secure, go ahead and run your wires up to the center of the vehicle. Now that we've got one pod installed, go ahead and repeat the process on the other side. All right, now it's time to install our power wire. We generally like to start from the battery and work our way forward. We find it easier to run the smaller ends through the tunnel, but we don't make any connections at the battery until everything else on the vehicle is finished. Starting at the battery, we're going to run the wire forward, making sure to stay away from any moving parts. We're going to feed it through the front of the tunnel, out up underneath the hood area. We're going to pull it up to the top, to the initial grommet that passes through the vehicle, and feed it through there. Once that's done, we can go ahead and reassemble the lower dash. All right, now it's time to install our head unit wiring harness. Now, in this particular kit, we're not going to be using the speaker outputs from the radio, because we have 2 dedicated amplifiers. So we are going to install the radio input harness. To make this easier, we suggest you run it when you run the head unit plug. Simply tie it together and run it down to the location where the radio is going to be, and leaving everything else to come back up to the center of the dash, because the whole point of this is getting these 2 power and grounds out underneath the hood. So let's go ahead and get that ready to go in the car. All right, now it's time to prep our pocket for installation. Now, not all of the RZRs came with this pocket. You are going to need this particular pocket. The easiest way to tell is the goofy little door. But when we prep it, we're actually going to lose the door. We're going to take it off and we're going to replace it with our mounting kit. I'm going to show you real quick how to do that. It's real simple. You open it up, you pull the 2 pins out, and you get rid of the door. Now, you can buy just this pocket on Amazon or your local Polaris dealer. It's really inexpensive, and we'll let you know the part number to do so. Now that we got the door removed, the next thing we need to do is drill a 1 3/4 inch hole in the back to allow all our wiring from the harness to pass through. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, now that we got our hole drilled, we can go ahead and get this installed in the vehicle. Start by feeding the radio harness down through the center of the dash and out into the radio opening. Feeding the radio harness into the hole on the back of the pocket, sliding the pocket into the dash and securing it into place. Secure the pocket by reinserting the T40 Torx into the back tab of the pocket. Take the plugs at the other end of the radio harness and feed them up through one of the 2 large holes in the top of the steering column. All right, now it's time to install our output harness from our 4-channel amplifier. But before we can go ahead and do that, we want to hook up our RGB that's included with your kit. To do this, we're going to use the ring terminal and the solder and shrink connectors that came with your kick panels. Hopefully you haven't thrown these out by now. If so, dig them out. Point being is, we got to get power to this thing. So what we're going to do is connect the 2 grounds together, so on, heat it, shrink it, which I'll show you how to do now, and then this is going to run out underneath the hood to the bus bar. All right, attach this pigtail to our RGB controller module using the solder and seal connectors. Now that we've got the ring terminal soldered to the RGB controller, we can go ahead and plug this into the harness and get this put in the vehicle. On the RGB controller, we want to feed the ring terminals down one of the 2 large holes in the top of the steering column into the center of the vehicle. And while we're here, we're also going to feed our amplifier power wires through one of the 2 holes in the top of the steering column. And lastly, take your 2 sets of ring terminals, one from the radio harness and one from the RGB harness, and feed them through the grommet on the firewall out underneath the hood. All right, now it's time to go ahead and install our amp rack. Now we prefer to mount the amplifiers to the rack prior to putting it into the vehicle. There's too many little nuts and bolts that can fall into the vehicle and slow the whole process down. Now, the amp rack sits in the vehicle like this, with these forks, let's call them, that are going to slide over the loosened steering column bolts. Then you're going to retighten them down. This one slot here is the top of the bracket that holds in the radio pocket. We're going to remove that bolt, put this in its place, and then put the bolt back in. But prior to doing that, let's go ahead and get the amps mounted to the plate. All right, now that we've got our amps mounted to our plate, I want to take a second and talk about the orientation. As far as left and right, it's not really important on which one goes on either side. What is important is the way that we've mounted them to the plate. We want to have the wires running towards the front of the vehicle and the gains running to the passenger compartment. This way they're easily accessible by removing the top hood. It also keeps all your wiring away from all the switches and speedometer and everything else you have going on in the front of the vehicle. And then one other thing real quick, you're going to find one plug that seems like an oddball on the monoblock amplifier. What this is your external bass control. Every kit with the subwoofer is going to come with one of these. This allows you to plug it directly in and mount the knob in the vehicle so that you can control the level of your bass as you're riding or changing music types. But with that being said, there's one more thing we need to do before we can get this in the vehicle. Okay, before we install the amplifiers in the vehicle, I want to give you a few little presets on the gains and the crossovers. This is just a starting point. Once it's in and everything's playing, you can go ahead and fine tune it for your listening. All right, I want to go through a quick gain setup on the 4-channel amplifier. Starting from the left side, the crossover for the front level, we're going to put this at 80 Hertz. We're then going to go to the gain and set that at approximately 5/8. Then next, going to the rear gain, again at 5/8, and in this instance on high on this crossover. For the sub amplifier, we want our input level to be on low, our gain to be on 5/8. We're not going to use any bass boost. We're going to set this at approximately 12 o'clock. This is your low pass filter. All right, now that we've got our preliminary gain setting structure all done, we got a little bit of vehicle prep before we can get this into the vehicle, so let's go ahead and get that done. To prep the vehicle for amplifier rack installation, we need to loosen up the two large 15mm bolts on the steering column. Also, we need to remove the 10mm on the top of the radio bracket. As you're inserting the amp rack, you want to make sure that the downward tab with the slots is aligning with the gap you've made by loosening the bolts in the steering column. Once the amp rack is in place, retighten your two large 15mm bolts. Then align your radio bracket along with the tab and reinsert the 10mm bolt you removed earlier. Now that we're ready to start terminating our wires, the first thing we want to do is connect the power and ground that we ran up earlier. You're simply going to match the yellow terminals with the yellow terminals and the black terminals with the black terminals. Red to red, black to black. Next, we will connect the input harness to the subwoofer amplifier and 4-channel amplifier. Next, we would want to connect the blue remote wire. Next, we're going to plug our external bass control into the monoblock amplifier. We can go ahead and plug the subwoofer amplifier's plug into the subwoofer box. Connect the amplifier's output to the left and right kick panel speaker plugs. Then, we're going to make a connection from our left speaker pod to our left output of the harness, and the right speaker pod to the right output of the harness. All right, now it's time to mount our radio into the dash kit. But before we do that, we want to drill a hole for our EBC, which we installed earlier and ran into the pocket with the radio harness. Now you'll notice on the back of this kit, it has two areas that are scored for mounting switches. It also has a centering divot inside those scored areas for situations just like this. So we're going to go ahead and get this drilled so that we can get our radio mounted into the kit. Now that we've got our mounting hole drilled for our EBC, it's time to mount the radio into the kit. Align the radio with the 4 threaded studs in the back of the kit. Snap the radio into place until it sits flush on the front. Next, secure with the supplied 5.5mm nuts. Once the radio is secured, we're going to go ahead and slide on our speed clips, which are going to lock the kit into the dash. All right, now that we got our radio mounted into our kit and all our hardware installed, I've got the nuts and bolts and tools we need to get this thing installed, so let's go make that happen. Connect the harness and the RCAs to the back of the radio. Go ahead and install the EBC into the kit. Place the radio in the pocket. Go ahead and secure the radio with the supplied bolts. Now we're all set to go ahead and make our connections at the battery. With our battery connections made, it's time to move out under the hood area. In this particular vehicle, there are no accessory power and ground wires run from the battery. In this instance, we're going to use one of the T25 Torx on either side of the bus bar as our ground point. The accessory is still present, so we'll go ahead and use that as well. With our electrical connections made, we can go ahead and test the system. Now that everything checks out, we can go ahead and tie up our wires and reassemble the vehicle. All right guys, as you've learned, these kits are super easy to install. With a nice easy plug and play and everything has its place. But if you should have any questions or concerns, hit us up on our 1-800 line or through our social media feeds. But for now, let's get this thing out onto the trails and enjoy it.